In 2010, I was working at a hotel on Lake Junaluska in western North Carolina. I lived about 15 minutes away in Waynesville and usually worked a pretty normal schedule, but one night I ended up getting off late because of a coworker who had gone home sick. When I left work, I got onto the road that runs between the building and the lake, which is Lakeshore Drive, and there were no other cars or people out anywhere. I was only a few seconds down that road when I saw something out on the water that was so out of place it made me slow down to just a mile or two an hour to look at it. From where I was on the road, it looked like an old wooden boat with very sharp angles and a faint ring of light around the bottom of it. That's about the only way I can describe it. It kind of had this small pirate ship shape to it, but a little wider and flatter, and it seemed to have some kind of platform around the bottom of it at the water level. This was a very weird thing to see because the only boats with motors allowed on that lake are tour boats, so I've never seen anything like it on the water. What was most confusing was the light around the bottom because it wasn't coming from the boat itself. It was underwater, and I could tell because it was blurry, like it was coming up through the water and barely lighting the boat from underneath. I ended up stopping my car in the middle of the road and rolling my side window down so I could have the clearest view of what was going on. I think I was mainly trying to understand why anyone would be out there with a boat like that so late at night. Then as I was watching this, the light underneath got noticeably brighter and started moving around the boat in a circle. I would probably compare the level of light to be that of a car's headlights, so it wasn't too bright, and the way it was circling the boat made it look like it was on a track underwater. I also noticed it was going faster each time it went around, and it kept speeding up like that until it got to the point where I couldn't tell it was moving anymore. It just looked like a solid circle of light underneath. Right when it got to that point, and this is hard for me to even say, I saw the boat lift straight out of the water and into the air. I would guess that it only came up 10 or 15 feet above the surface when the light underneath went completely dark. Even without that light, I could still see the whole thing. It was just a little harder to make out. Then I realized that the part I had been looking at on top of the water wasn't the whole thing, and a little more than half of it had been underwater the entire time. It was too dark to see any details, but the overall size was more than twice as big as I thought it was. This thing kept going into the air until it probably got to 100 or 200 feet. Then it started to move away from the lake and over a small hill that's on the other side. I should also mention that I still had my window down, and the only thing I heard during this was the sound of water falling back down to the lake when it lifted up. Everything else was silent. After it had gone over the hill, I decided to get out of the road and pulled into a parking spot. That whole side of the road has spaces where you can park, and every space looks directly at the lake. I shut my headlights off and sat in the dark for at least 10 minutes waiting to see if anything else was going to happen. I was really in a state of awe and my adrenaline was pumping, but unfortunately it never came back over the hill. It actually took me a while to accept everything, probably because it was so unnatural. I could not believe that I had just seen this thing that I couldn't even begin to identify, and I watched it basically break the laws of physics right in front of me. I don't know what time I finally left or even how late it was when I got home. I wasn't paying attention to any of that. I really only remember looking out the windows all the way home and trying to see it again. My husband got every detail when I was back at the house, and he was just as dumbfounded as I was. I will also say that he didn't try to explain it away or tell me I was exaggerating. He was all ears and couldn't believe what I had seen. I love him for that, since I had no idea how he was going to react when I told him. I think there are only 3 or 4 other people outside of my husband that know about this. For a while, I wanted to say something when I was at the hotel, but I never did. The community up there has a pretty deep religious history. Not that there's anything wrong with that. I'm a Christian myself, but I wasn't that close to any of my coworkers, and it never felt like the place to bring it up. One thing I find so interesting is that before this happened, you could have asked me to sketch up 1,000 different pictures of what I thought a UFO might look like, and not one of them would look like what I saw. It was way too strange. Nothing about it matches any of the sightings and crafts I've heard other people describe, and the way it lifted out of the water and floated away shouldn't be possible. Of course, I have a lot of questions like anyone would. One that I think about a lot though is if it had been hiding in the lake and came up from underwater, or if it had come down for a few minutes before I got off work and I just happened to catch it leaving. It's not a very deep lake, so I'm guessing it must have come down from somewhere, but I don't really know. Either way, it completely amazes me that I was at that exact place on the road at that exact time. When I was in high school, a big group of us used to have what we called parties at a family friend's campsite on their farm. They weren't real parties because we were all around 16, so there was no alcohol involved or anything like that. The camp itself was about an acre of land with a small pole barn on it that only had siding on 3 sides and no electricity. You could either set up a tent wherever you wanted to, or sleep in the back of someone's truck if it was warm enough. We would also set a bunch of Coleman propane lanterns around, blast music through a battery-powered boombox, and usually roast hot dogs over the rock fire pit in the middle of camp. About 100 feet behind the pole barn, there was a line of dense trees that went along the edge of the property, but you could still see through them, and beyond that was a huge neighboring field. Since most of us had just hit the driving age, some people had cars and some didn't. My best friend and I didn't, so we rode our four-wheelers out to the party, and this was a totally normal and acceptable way to get around where we grew up. This all started when our whole group noticed a pretty large glow coming through the trees right on the horizon. It had a very deep orange color, and since it was fall, we figured it was the harvest moon because it looked full. Honestly, it made the atmosphere kind of spooky, and we loved it. While we were waiting for the last couple of people to get there, my friend and I rode around the farm and took a trail down into a lower area. As we were coming back up the hill about a quarter mile from the party, we had a clear uphill view of the camp and the rising moon through the trees. Something about the moon didn't look right though. It was still the same orange color, just like a full moon would be on the horizon, but from our perspective, it wasn't round. It had a more flattened oval shape, like it had been smashed down. We both yelled to each other about how weird it looked, but when we got back, we had already forgotten about it. After hanging out for a while, it got colder and everyone migrated to the fire where the tents were set up. There was a lot of talking and loud music, and 5 or 6 people had a card game going. Then, out of nowhere, one of our friends shouted over the noise and told everyone to be quiet. He happened to be lying in a hammock away from the fire and close to the tree line. I don't think anyone listened to him the first time, but he yelled again, that time saying shut up, and his tone was serious enough that someone shut off the music and everything went completely quiet. As soon as the noise died down and our ears adjusted, we could hear the weirdest sound coming from the trees or maybe from the field behind them. To me, it sounded like a low murmuring, and I couldn't tell if it was human voices or animals or something else, but every single one of us could hear it. We all just stood there staring into the trees and listening. I don't remember who it was, but someone asked out loud why the moon was still there. No one had been paying attention, including me, but that orange glow was still there in the exact same spot it had been over an hour earlier. That's when it hit us that it couldn't be the moon because it would have been much higher in the sky after that amount of time. Right then, the murmuring in the trees stopped, and it didn't fade out. It was a dead stop into total silence. Almost immediately after that, our entire group saw the glow start to move horizontally across the horizon, and it became glaringly obvious it was not the moon. We also realized that it was a lot closer than we thought, like just on the other side of the trees. It must have gone about 300 yards to our right, staying behind the trees, but still completely visible through them. Then it went dark. Within 5 to 10 seconds of the light going out, we heard a jingling sound coming from the right side of the trees where they ended. And at first it wasn't that loud, but then it multiplied and it was like 100 different jingling sounds all at once. It finally clicked for some of us, and we realized that my friend's family had their dairy cows out to pasture on the other side of those trees, and that's what we were hearing. The entire herd was running toward the camp. If you don't know about cows, they have normal moo sounds and distressed moo sounds. Every cow was making distress sounds, and the jingling we were hearing was from their collars, which meant they were moving fast. I remember seeing some of the guys panicking and jumping into their trucks, but a few of us kept our cool and thought there might be someone up there messing with the animals. My friend and I got on our quads, and one of the older guys who was 18 got into his truck. Then we followed him up the hill toward the neighboring field. When we got around the trees, we scanned every direction we could with the truck's headlights, and we even used an old spotlight that plugged into the cigarette lighter to check as much of the field as we could. There was nothing up there. We never saw a vehicle, a person, or anything else. It was just open, empty field. To say we were confused would be a massive understatement. Something huge was there, and we had no idea where it could have gone. The weirdest part was how big the orange light was. It was easily big enough to make us all think it was the moon. There's no way an object that size could just disappear. There wasn't even anywhere it could have gone without passing the camp. And then there were the cows, which aren't exactly fast animals that like to run long distances. They had covered nearly a mile getting back to the barn in just minutes, and when we drove down there to check on them, they were still restless and definitely stressed. Something had really spooked them. All of this was enough to make everyone pack up and leave. Nobody wanted to stay the night out there after that, especially since we hadn't found any kind of explanation. For years after this happened, the story circulated through our group of friends, and some of us still talk about it. Personally, I think we saw something extraterrestrial, and maybe it was able to hide from us or cloak itself when we drove up to the field. It's a little scary to think we could have been right next to it and not even known. The truth is, though, we don't know what it was, but it looked and moved like nothing I've ever seen before. We did eventually have more parties out there, but it wasn't until the following summer, and they never felt the same. Not for those of us who were there that night, anyway. As far as I know, nothing else has ever happened out there, but it's something I'll never forget, and I'm sure none of the other guys have forgotten about it either. I had what I believe was an abduction experience in 2022. This happened at my home on the island of Oahu, where I live with my wife and our 2 boys. I had just gotten off of work on a Friday, and the first thing I had to do was yard work. I mowed both the front and back yards, then cleaned everything up, and was looking forward to spending the rest of the weekend with my family. That night I went to bed as usual, and it's where this all started. Sometime during the night, I found myself walking down our hallway from the bedroom out to the living room. It was dark, just like it would be at night, but I remember hearing what I thought was construction equipment outside. I was also seeing flashes of color coming in through the living room window. I wanted to see what was going on, so I went over to the window and lifted the blinds all the way up. Outside, it looked like there were multiple police cars parked in front of our house. I could see the blue and red lights flashing, but everything else was blurry. This is hard to explain since our house is close to the road. I just couldn't get my eyes to focus. I still thought it was something serious though, so without thinking, I put my indoor slippers on that I keep near the door and walked outside. I want to mention that these are slippers I only wear inside the house. They had never been outside. I only put them on because I thought the police were out front. Also, when I say slippers, I'm talking about flip-flops, just to be clear. That's what we call them here. I walked across our front yard toward the street, and I still couldn't get my eyes to focus on what was going on, even though it was right in front of me. I could see other things fine, I just couldn't tell what the police cars were doing. Right around the spot where our grass stops, I felt this force hit me, which is the only way I can describe it. My body went forward and upward at the same time, and the pressure of it made my back arch like if someone pushed you from behind. I wouldn't say it hurt, but it was intense. Then instead of falling forward, I felt my feet come off the ground. I remember looking off to one side and seeing tree branches going past me like I was being lifted into the air by a crane. Then there was a gap in what I remember. I went straight from being in our front yard to sitting upright in a bed. When I looked around, I was in my old bedroom at my parents' house, and it looked exactly the same as when I was a kid. It didn't make any sense to me because I still see that room all the time when I go over there, and it doesn't look like that. It's now a spare bedroom, and my boys sleep there when they stay with Grandma and Grandpa. While I was sitting on the bed, a man who I had never seen before walked into the room, came right up to the side of the bed, and told me he was there to make sure I was healthy and on track. I have always remembered that because it's not a very normal thing to say to someone. Those were the exact words he used though, healthy and on track. He also had something in his hand that he held a few inches above my feet, then slowly moved it all the way up my legs and body and over my face. The whole time this was happening, I wasn't in pain and this guy wasn't being aggressive, but there was a fear in me and I was trying to hide it and act like I wasn't scared. It reminded me of getting a shot at the doctor as a kid where I would be afraid, but I would also try to be brave at the same time. Another thing that doesn't make sense is I wasn't asking any questions. I was just sitting still and letting it all happen. When he was done running this thing over my body, we talked for a short time, and as hard as I've tried to remember what he said to me, I just can't. After this, I have another gap where I don't really know what happened, but I ended up back in my front yard again and I was looking at the road. I was extremely confused and the fear I'd been feeling got a lot stronger, even though I should have been relieved to be back at home. I couldn't stop thinking that something was seriously wrong. I just didn't know what it was. I sort of jogged back across the lawn to get away from this feeling and went inside the house, and that's basically where my experience ended. I originally thought this whole thing was a dream because I woke up afterward and I was in bed next to my wife. It was still the middle of the night, so I ended up going back to sleep, but I didn't spend much time even thinking about it. When I finally did get up for real on Saturday morning, it was almost 10 o'clock, and that's late for me. My wife and my boys were already up and out in the living room, so I took a quick shower and went out to see them. The first thing I did when I came out was put my slippers on, and it only took me 2 steps to notice they were dirty. I took one off and looked at it, and there were grass clippings stuck to the bottom. Then I checked the other one, and it was the same. They had definitely been worn outside. I asked my wife and my boys about it. They all swear no one touched them, and I know they're not lying about it. I must have actually gotten up and gone outside, as crazy as that is to say, but I have no idea what happened to me while I was out there. This has made me look into abduction reports and close encounters, and I've found a lot of similarities between what other people say and what happened to me. Some people might think this was just a dream and my slippers were dirty and it's not evidence of anything. That could be true, but if it were, it would have to be the biggest coincidence of all time since I have never worn that pair of slippers outside, not even one time since they were new. The chances of them having grass clippings on the soles the very next morning after my dream seems too impossible. I want to thank everyone for watching another episode of Skywatcher Stories. If you like hearing these personal experiences of strange sightings and alien encounters, please subscribe because I upload new episodes every week and it really helps the channel. Until next time, keep watching the skies.